The wind whipped across the endless Dakota plains in 1878, carrying whispers of change and hardship. For Sarah, a farmer's wife, the wind often felt like a lonely sigh. Her days used to be filled with the warmth of her husband, John. They worked their small farm together, their laughter echoing in the barn. But then, a sickness took John, leaving Sarah with a heavy heart and a farm to manage all by herself. Each morning, the sunrise brought more work and less joy. Sarah was a kind woman, with a gentle smile and hands that knew the feel of soil and dough. But she was also a big woman, sturdy from years of hard work and good food. In a small town where everyone knew everyone and often talked about everyone, her size sometimes drew unwanted attention. When she went to the general store, she'd hear hushed whispers and see quick glances. At the town meetings, some folks would snicker if she walked by. It hurt, deep down, to be judged for something as simple as how she looked. She missed John, who had always seen her heart, not just her size. The loneliness was a cold blanket, and the unkindness of others made it even colder. Still, Sarah tried her best to carry on, hoping one day the sadness would lift and the whispers would stop. The loneliness and the whispers often made Sarah want to hide away, but she still believed in finding comfort. So, when Sunday came, even though dark clouds rolled over the Dakota sky, she prepared for church. It was a chore to hitch her old horse to the buggy, her muscles aching from the week's work, but she pressed on. The air grew heavy, smelling of coming rain, and the first fat drops began to speckle the dusty road as she set out. Church was supposed to be a place of peace, a refuge from the harshness of life. Sarah longed for that feeling, for words that would lift her spirit and help her feel less alone. She pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, the simple fabric offering little warmth against the chill. As she guided the buggy down the road, the rain began to fall harder, drumming a steady beat on the buggy's canvas top. It felt like the sky was crying along with her own silent tears. She hoped that inside the small wooden church, she would find a moment of quiet strength, a connection to something bigger than her own sorrow. Perhaps today, the preacher's words would finally mend a tiny piece of her broken heart. Perhaps, for just an hour, she could forget the cruel glances and the emptiness in her home. Sarah found a seat near the back of the small church, hoping to blend in and just listen. The wood creaked under her weight as she sat, and she tried to make herself small. The young preacher, Pastor Thomas, stood at the front, his voice clear and kind as he began his sermon. For a few moments, Sarah felt a flicker of the peace she had hoped for. The words about love and forgiveness were like a gentle balm to her aching spirit. But then, a giggle broke the quiet from a few rows ahead. Sarah tried to ignore it, focusing on the pastor's words. A moment later, she heard a whisper, then another, louder this time. She could feel eyes on her, sharp and curious. Turning her head slightly, she saw Mrs. Gable and Mrs. Henderson, their faces close together, hands covering their mouths as they giggled again. Their eyes darted to Sarah, then back to each other, a mean little secret passing between them. The comfort Sarah had felt melted away, replaced by a familiar sting. Her heart pounded in her chest, and a hot flush spread across her face. The preacher's voice faded into a distant hum as the whispers grew in her mind. It was about her, she knew it. About her size, about her husband being gone, about her trying to be strong. A single tear escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek, quickly followed by another. The hope she had brought into the church was now shattering into 1,000 tiny pieces. The tears came faster now, blurring her vision. Each whisper felt like a sharp jab, twisting the knife of her grief and loneliness. The kind words of the sermon were lost, drowned out by the mean-spirited laughter and the burning shame in her own heart. Sarah tried to breathe, to calm herself, but her chest felt tight, as if a heavy stone had settled there. She couldn't stay. She couldn't bear another moment of their cruel amusement. With a sudden surge of pain and desperation, Sarah pushed herself up from the wooden bench. The creak of the wood seemed to echo loudly in the quiet church, drawing even more eyes to her. She didn't look at anyone, her gaze fixed on the double doors at the back. Her shawl slipped from her shoulders, but she didn't stop to pick it up. She just needed to escape. She hurried down the aisle, her footsteps heavy and quick. The faces of the churchgoers were a blur, some showing surprise, others still holding their knowing smiles. Sarah felt their eyes follow her, but she refused to meet them. Pushing open the heavy wooden doors, she burst out into the stormy afternoon. The rain was coming down in sheets, cold and hard against her face, mixing with her hot tears. But even the biting wind and the soaking rain felt better than the stifling air inside the church. She ran, not knowing where she was going, only that she had to get away. Away from the whispers, away from the judgment, away from the place that was supposed to offer comfort but had only given her more pain. Pastor Thomas had been speaking of compassion and welcoming strangers, his voice earnest and full of hope. He saw Sarah in the back row, her head bowed, and noticed the faint shimmer of tears on her cheeks. He'd also heard the snickers, low and quick, from Mrs. Gable and Mrs. Henderson. A knot tightened in his stomach. He'd seen it before, the way some members treated those they deemed different or less. When Sarah suddenly stood and bolted from the church, a gasp went through the congregation. Pastor Thomas watched her go, his heart sinking with each heavy step she took towards the door. The sound of the doors banging shut against the wind was like a thunderclap in the quiet room. He looked out at the faces of his flock, some surprised, some still smirking, others simply looking away. A wave of anger, hot and righteous, washed over him. This was not what God asked of them. This was not the love he preached. His sermon, meant to bring peace, had been mocked by their cruel actions. How could he speak of kindness when his own people showed such meanness? He felt a deep disappointment, a bitter taste in his mouth. He was sick of their false smiles and their quick judgments. The comfort he hoped to bring them felt like a lie in the face of their unkindness towards Sarah. He clenched his fists, a battle brewing inside him. The anger swelled in Pastor Thomas until he could no longer speak of love and peace as if nothing had happened. He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes sweeping over the surprised faces in the pews. The church grew very quiet, all eyes now on him, waiting. "We speak of God's love," he began, his voice low but firm. "But what did we just show? A woman, hurting and alone, came here seeking comfort. And what did she receive? Whispers, giggles, shame." His voice grew louder, filling the small church. "I am tired of this. Tired of false smiles on Sunday and cruel hearts the rest of the week. This church is meant to be a refuge, not a place for judgment and scorn." He looked directly at Mrs. Gable and Mrs. Henderson, who quickly looked down at their laps, their faces red. "I would rather have a handful of truly kind souls than a room full of people who pretend to be good while hurting others. My duty is to God's love, and that means standing up for the vulnerable, not for those who delight in tearing others down." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "I care more about helping one truly good person find peace than keeping 100 who spread unkindness." The words hung in the air, sharp and clear, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. With his powerful words still echoing in the stunned silence of the church, Pastor Thomas didn't wait for a response. He didn't look back at the shocked faces or the red cheeks of those he called out. His heart was fixed on something else, on someone else. Without another word, he turned from the pulpit, his long coat swishing behind him. He walked quickly down the main aisle, past the rows of silent parishioners. A few stared, mouths agape, unable to believe what they were seeing. Their young preacher, leaving service in the middle of a rainstorm, abandoning his flock. But Pastor Thomas didn't hesitate. He reached the heavy wooden doors that Sarah had fled through just moments before, pushed them open, and stepped out into the wild weather. The rain immediately soaked his hair and clothes, but he barely noticed. The wind whipped at his coat, trying to pull him back, but he leaned into it. He squinted through the downpour, searching for any sign of Sarah. The road was muddy, and the puddles grew bigger with each passing moment. He took a deep breath, cupped his hand around his mouth, and called out, his voice strong against the wind and rain. "Sarah, Mrs. Peterson, wait." He began to walk faster, then to run, determined to find her before she disappeared completely into the vast, wet landscape. He would not let her face this alone. Pastor Thomas spotted her a little way down the road, huddled beneath the thick branches of an old oak tree. Its leaves, though swaying wildly in the wind, offered a small shield from the worst of the rain. Sarah was sitting on the wet ground, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Her simple dress was plastered to her, and her hair, usually neatly tied, was now a damp mess around her face. He walked up to her slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice gentle despite the storm around them. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen, wide with surprise and a hint of fear. "Pastor Thomas," she whispered, as if she couldn't believe he was really there. He knelt beside her, not caring that his trousers were getting soaked in the mud. "Yes, it's me. I saw you leave. I couldn't let you be out here alone." He reached out a hand, not quite touching her, but offering comfort. "Please don't cry, Sarah. You are a special and kind woman. I know in my heart. Those people in the church, their words mean nothing compared to the goodness inside you." He looked into her tear-filled eyes. "You don't deserve this sadness. No one does. I truly don't want you to feel this way." The rain poured around them, but in that moment, under the sheltering branches of the old tree, his words were a small, warm light. Sarah could only stare at Pastor Thomas, his words echoing the kindness her late husband always showed. No one had spoken to her with such warmth and belief since John passed. Her tears slowed, but the ache in her chest remained. She didn't understand why he, the preacher, was out here in the rain with her. Pastor Thomas saw the question in her eyes. He sighed, a deep, weary sound. "Sarah," he began again, his voice firm with conviction, "what happened in there? It was wrong, so wrong, and I will not stand for it." He paused, looking out at the sweeping, rain-soaked plains, then back at her. "I mean what I said in there. My flock, my church members. If they choose to be cruel, then they're not following the true path." He leaned a little closer, his gaze steady and earnest. "I want you to know this, truly. I would rather lose every single person in that church, every last one, than let your soul feel alone and hurt. Their judgment is not God's judgment. Your spirit, your goodness, means more to me than keeping a congregation that would treat you so poorly." The words were like a strong, steady hand reaching out to her in the storm, a promise of protection she hadn't known she needed. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her, chasing away some of the coldness that had settled in her heart. Sarah listened to Pastor Thomas, his words cutting through the sound of the rain like sunshine breaking through clouds. No one, not even John, had ever spoken to her with such fierce loyalty and belief. To hear him say he would give up his entire church for her well-being was astounding. It was a kindness so big, so unexpected, that it made her heart swell. The coldness that had wrapped around her since John's death, and especially since the cruel whispers in the church, began to loosen its grip. A small, unfamiliar feeling started to bloom inside her chest. It wasn't happiness yet, not fully, but something lighter than sorrow. It was a tiny spark, a fragile possibility. She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing not just the young preacher, but a man of true goodness standing in the rain, soaked to the bone, just for her. For the first time in a very long time, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. A hope that maybe she wasn't completely alone, that maybe there was someone who saw her worth beyond her size or her sadness. A hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the world wasn't entirely made of unkindness. A small, tentative smile touched the corners of her lips, a fragile sign that the comfort she had sought in the church had, in fact, found her out here in the storm. Under the drumming rain, sheltered imperfectly by the oak, Sarah and Pastor Thomas began to talk. At first, her voice was shaky, telling him about John and the quiet farm, and how the town's whispers felt like stones thrown at her heart. He listened with deep attention, his eyes kind. Then he started to speak, not as a preacher to his flock, but as one person to another. He spoke of his own struggles, of being a young pastor in a new town, trying to guide people who sometimes seemed to forget the very lessons he taught. He admitted to feeling lonely too, even though he stood before a congregation every Sunday. He confessed how hard it was to watch unkindness spread and how often he wished for a truer, simpler faith among his people. As they shared their hearts, the rain seemed to soften its beat, becoming a gentle backdrop to their quiet conversation. They found a surprising comfort in each other's company, two souls finding common ground in the midst of a storm. Sarah realized that even a strong young man like Pastor Thomas could carry a burden of loneliness, just like her. And he, in turn, saw past her sorrow and her sighs to the strong, kind woman underneath. They talked about their hopes, their fears, and the simple beauty of the Dakota land, forgetting for a while the damp cold and the world beyond their tree. The rain eventually stopped, and Pastor Thomas helped Sarah back to her buggy. As they parted ways, a new understanding, a quiet promise of friendship, hung in the air between them. True to that unspoken promise, Pastor Thomas started visiting Sarah's farm. At first, it was just to check on her to make sure she was doing all right after that awful Sunday. But soon, his visits became more frequent and more helpful. He wasn't afraid to roll up his sleeves and get his hands dirty. He helped her mend fences that had fallen in the wind, split firewood for her stove, and even offered advice on planting the spring crops. Sarah, who had been struggling to keep up with everything alone, found a surprising strength in his presence. His laughter filled the quiet farmhouse, and his steady hands made light work of heavy chores. They would talk for hours over cups of strong coffee, sharing stories and dreams. Sarah told him more about John, and Pastor Thomas shared his hopes for a kinder community. They found joy in simple things, like watching the sunset over the fields or seeing the first green shoots push through the soil. They weren't just a preacher and a farmer's wife anymore. They were two good people who had found a deep, true friendship. Each visit chased away a little more of Sarah's loneliness, and Pastor Thomas felt a sense of purpose beyond the church walls. News travels fast in a small Dakota town, especially when it involves the preacher. It wasn't long before the people of the church started noticing Pastor Thomas's frequent trips to Sarah's farm. Wagons passing by would see his horse hitched outside her place, sometimes for hours. Whispers, which had once been aimed at Sarah, now turned to Pastor Thomas. "He's spending all his time out there," Mrs. Gable would say to Mrs. Henderson, her voice low but sharp. "Neglecting his duties, I hear." Others chimed in, their faces tight with disapproval. "A pastor shouldn't be so friendly with a widow, not like that," another woman remarked, pursing her lips. Some were just surprised, unsure what to make of their young, earnest preacher suddenly spending so much time with a woman they had all but cast out. But for many, surprise quickly turned to anger. They felt betrayed. Pastor Thomas had shamed them in front of everyone, then gone straight to the very person they had ridiculed. They believed he was choosing Sarah over them, over his flock, over the church itself. Sundays became tense, with colder greetings and fewer friendly smiles directed at the pulpit. The offering plates seemed a little lighter and the pews a little emptier each week. The church members, especially those who had been most unkind, grew more and more upset, feeling that their pastor had abandoned them. Pastor Thomas was well aware of the growing discontent within his church. He saw the cold stares, heard the thinly veiled complaints after Sunday service, and knew the whispers followed him just as they had followed Sarah. He understood that his actions were causing a stir, perhaps even risking his position as their pastor. Yet, none of it swayed him. His time with Sarah had shown him a depth of kindness and strength that few others in the town possessed. He saw how she worked tirelessly on her farm, how she cared for her animals, and how she still managed a gentle spirit despite all her hardships. In her, he found a genuine heart, a soul that truly understood what it meant to struggle and still find goodness. Compared to the shallow judgments and false piety of some of his church members, Sarah's honest nature shone brightly. He had made a promise, not just to her, but to himself and to his beliefs, that he would stand for what was right. He cared little for the opinions of those who preached one thing and practiced another. His heart was clear. He had found a truly good person in Sarah, and that was all that mattered. He would not abandon her, nor would he compromise his own convictions for the sake of a dwindling, judgmental flock. He would continue to visit, to help, and to cherish the friendship that had blossomed in the rain. The weeks turned into months, and spring unfolded across the Dakota plains, bringing warmth and color. Pastor Thomas and Sarah's friendship had deepened, blooming much like the wildflowers in the fields. One particularly bright, sunny afternoon, Pastor Thomas was helping Sarah plant new rows of corn. The sun warmed their backs, and a gentle breeze rustled through the nascent green stalks. He stopped, wiping sweat from his brow, and turned to Sarah, a serious but tender look on his face. "Sarah," he began, his voice a little softer than usual, "I've thought a lot about things about us." Sarah's heart gave a little flutter, a feeling she hadn't known in years. She paused her work, her eyes meeting his. "I came out here to serve God, to build a good community," he continued, taking her hands in his, "and in finding you, in truly knowing you, I've found more goodness than I ever imagined. You are strong, kind, and your heart is pure. I love your laughter, your quiet strength, and the way you look at the world." He squeezed her hands gently. "I love you, Sarah. I love you for exactly who you are, every part of you." He knelt there in the rich, dark soil, not in prayer, but in earnest hope. "Sarah Peterson, will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" The question hung in the warm spring air, as clear and bright as the sunshine above them. Sarah stared at Pastor Thomas, kneeling before her in the dirt, the sunshine making his hair gleam. His words, "I love you for exactly who you are," echoed in her mind. For so long, she had felt unseen, judged, and alone. Now, here was a man, a good man, offering her his whole heart, loving her completely, not despite her size or her past, but for all of it. A warmth spread through her, stronger and brighter than any she had felt since John's passing. It was a feeling of pure, simple joy, so intense it brought fresh tears to her eyes, but these were tears of happiness. Her hands, still clasped in his, trembled slightly. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Oh, yes, Thomas. 1,000 times yes." A wide, joyful smile lit up Pastor Thomas's face. He rose, pulling her gently to her feet, and wrapped his arms around her. Sarah leaned into his embrace, feeling safe and cherished. In that moment, surrounded by the budding cornfield under the vast Dakota sky, she felt truly, wonderfully happy. It was a happiness she hadn't dared to dream of, a sense of being loved and truly belonging for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The loneliness that had shadowed her days finally lifted, replaced by a radiant hope for their future together. With their hearts full and their future bright, Sarah and Pastor Thomas began to plan their wedding. They thought about the little church in town, but the memory of that rainy Sunday and the unkind faces still lingered. Neither of them wanted their special day to be shadowed by such feelings. "I want our promises to be made under God's true roof," Sarah said, looking out at the endless sky over her fields, where the air is fresh and honest, not stifled by judgment. Pastor Thomas smiled, understanding her completely. "That's exactly what I was thinking. The church walls felt too small, too unwelcoming for the love we share." He remembered the vast, comforting space under the old oak tree where he had found her crying. "Let's be married outside, under the big, open sky, with the sun shining down as our witness." Sarah's face lit up. It was perfect. A ceremony held in the wide-open expanse of the Dakota prairie, with the wind as their music and the warmth of the sun as their blessing. It would be a celebration of their true selves, surrounded by the natural beauty they both loved, far from the critical eyes of the townspeople. It would be a fresh start, as open and free as the sky itself. They decided on a spot on Sarah's land, near a gentle rise where the views stretched for miles, a place that felt as boundless as their newfound happiness. The day of the wedding dawned clear and bright, just as Sarah and Thomas had hoped. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of prairie grass and damp earth. On a gentle rise on Sarah's land, a small gathering began to form. It wasn't a large crowd, nor was it the entire congregation that Pastor Thomas had once led. Instead, it was a smaller, truer group. Among them were Sarah's closest neighbors, people who had always shown her kindness, offering a helping hand after John's passing. There was old Mr. Henderson, who always traded fresh eggs for her homemade bread, and Martha, who sometimes came to sit and sew, with Sarah sharing quiet company. From the church, only a few brave and genuinely kind souls had come. They were the ones who had quietly felt shame for the unkindness shown that rainy Sunday, and who admired Pastor Thomas's courage. They weren't the ones who had whispered. They were the ones who believed in true compassion. They stood in a loose circle, their faces smiling, their eyes holding warmth and good wishes. There was no judgment here, only quiet support and love. The absence of the critical townspeople was not a loss, but a blessing. It made the small gathering feel even more special, a true testament to love and genuine friendship. This was their chosen flock, gathered under the vast, honest sky to witness a love that had grown from a shared moment of pain and defiance. With the sun warm on their faces and the wide Dakota sky stretching endlessly above them, Pastor Thomas and Sarah stood hand in hand. The small group of friends and kind souls watched, their eyes shining with happiness for the couple. Pastor Thomas, no longer a preacher to a judgmental flock, but a man deeply in love, looked into Sarah's eyes. "Sarah," he said, his voice clear and strong, "I promise to love you, to honor you, and to cherish you always. I promise to be your partner in joy and in hardship through every season of our lives, under this beautiful sky and forevermore." Sarah, her heart overflowing, returned his gaze. "Thomas," she began, her voice steady despite the tears of happiness in her eyes, "I promise to love you with all my heart, to stand by your side, and to build a life of kindness and truth with you. You have shown me what true love means, and I will be yours forever." With those heartfelt vows, they exchanged simple rings. Then, with a joyful kiss, they sealed their promises. The small gathering cheered softly, and the breeze seemed to carry their happiness across the plains. They had found love in the most unexpected way, born from pain and courage. Together, under the boundless sky, Pastor Thomas and Sarah began their new, happy life, a life built on true love, respect, and unwavering kindness.